Have you ever wondered how to remember vocabulary forever and never forget it again?
You learn the word somewhere, but now you can't remember what it means. And it's so frustrating.
But understanding how memory works can help you remember new vocabulary forever.
Really? Forever?
And there are really fun ways to learn new words that actually stick in your brain. I spent hours studying this topic, so you don't have to. The last method is especially unique and fun, and I'm excited to share it with everyone, so stay until the end.
You piqued my interest. By the way, if you're new here, this is the third episode of Easygoing English Podcast, hosted by Josh.
And I'm Claire. If you haven't already, now is the time to subscribe. We upload new videos every week, sharing learning techniques and English you might not find in your textbook.
If you want to improve your English, we got your back.
All right, let's get started. Before we get into the memorization techniques, it's important that we understand how our memory works. In cognitive science, memory is divided into 3 types. We haven't talked about this yet, but Josh actually studied psychology in college, so you might remember what the different types of memory are.
It's been years since I studied them, but let me brush up on my knowledge. One of them is short-term memory.
Right.
And long-term memory. Actually, I can only remember short-term and long-term memory. Is there one more?
The third one is working memory. You may not remember this one, because according to some of the articles I've read, some scientists don't seem to differentiate short-term memory and working memory, while others do.
Interesting. What are the differences?
So, short-term memory only holds information for a very short period of time, typically about 15 to 30 seconds. It has a limited capacity. On average, most people can store about 5 to 9 items, or chunks at a time, though some research suggests the true average may be closer to 4 chunks, depending on the individual and the type of information.
So in the context of English learning, when you encounter a new word, it will first get into your short-term memory, and that'll stay there for 15 to 30 seconds.
Exactly. And long-term memory stores new information for a much longer period of time, ranging from minutes to even years. And it has no limit to how much information it can store.
So the words that you can use freely, even though you studied them months or years ago, are in your long-term memory. So, how can we store new words in long-term memory instead of short-term memory?
That's where working memory comes in. Like I said, some scientists think that short-term memory and working memory are the same thing because they both have a limited capacity and hold information for a short period of time. But the key distinction is that working memory helps you work with the information. And working memory is the one that transfers the information from short-term memory to long-term memory, and also it retrieves information already stored in your long-term memory to be used in the present.
Okay, so let's say you make up a sentence with a word you just recently learned. You just use your working memory to pull it from your long-term memory and make the sentence. And by using your working memory like that, I guess you just buried the word deeper into your long-term memory and made it harder to forget.
Exactly. If you know how your memory works, you can transfer new information effectively into your long-term memory. And I'm going to share how to do it. Some of the techniques are scientifically supported, while others are my recommendations based on how memory works. The first one is what you just touched upon, using the words in actual sentences. You write a few sentences with the words you just learned.
Yeah, that's an effective way of learning new words. You can also learn how to use them correctly when you make up example sentences.
I'd recommend you use them when you're talking to your friend who is a native English speaker. If you're using it the wrong way, they may tell you, or you will see it in their reaction.
Yeah, seeing reactions in other people to what you just said will definitely help you know if you're using the word correctly.
Yeah, and if you don't have friends who are native English speakers, you can also talk to an AI. For example, I use ChatGPT when I study Japanese. I ask it to let me know if I'm not using words correctly.
There are also ways of making friends with real people, like language exchange apps. Maybe we should cover this topic in the future.
Definitely. I've made a handful of great friends on apps. And more on the topic of using words and sentences. One of the effective ways of learning is linking the new words with something you already know.
Can you give us an example?
Okay, so let's say you're learning the word ephemeral, which means lasting only for a short period of time. You can make an example sentence. The beauty of cherry blossoms is ephemeral.
I see. You could link the new word with information already stored in your long-term memory that way.
You got the idea. You're going to find out soon, but many of the memorization techniques involve making associations.
That makes sense. What's the next one?
All right, so the next one is creating stories with the new words. You may simply tell a story using vocabulary that you just recently studied. Keep it engaging and interesting. And the reason this is effective is because when the information is seen as emotionally important, it will be transferred down the memory line and registered in your long-term memory.
Yeah, we tend to remember events that we've had strong emotions about.
And this also helps you improve your storytelling skills. One tip is to use a lot of sensory words to paint a vivid image. Describe the people and actions in the story in a way that engages the listener.
And try not to force the new words into the story. Try to weave them into it naturally.
Yeah, that brings us back to the point of this method. You want to make sure that the association between the words and story is as natural as possible to strengthen the memory of the new words.
I think that's the same reason why watching TV shows and movies is so helpful. You make associations between expressions and stories.
You read my mind. The next method is watching movies and TV shows.
That's my favorite method, actually.
I think watching shows and movies is helpful because they provide rich context for new words and expressions. The contextual information helps you understand the meanings and usage of the new vocabulary in a way that leads to deeper processing in working memory.
Yeah, if the story is good, it will get you emotionally involved in the characters. You will remember some scenes forever.
I personally think that this may be the best way of learning a language if you want to sound natural.
Oh, really? Why do you think so?
Just based on the people I've known. The people who have surprised me by how natural their English sounded often told me that they had learned the language just by watching shows and movies. They may not have spent so much time actively studying it, so they lacked vocabulary, but when they spoke, they sounded so natural.
Maybe I should watch more French TV shows and movies to study French.
You definitely should. All right, next up. Flashcards.
Oh yeah, especially if you're at the beginning of the language learning journey. Using flashcards will come in handy.
If you're just starting to learn English, you probably have to write English words on the front and the definitions in your native language on the back. Repetition is key to storing the information in your long-term memory, so you may want to go over them whenever you have time. Once you've learned enough words, you may start writing the definitions in simpler and easier English words.
Yeah, it's like translating English into simpler English. It would probably help you start thinking in English that way too.
Right. My personal advice is to keep the definitions as short as possible. You want to be able to immediately come up with the meanings in your head when you see the words. Do you have any tips?
My recommendation is to use images whenever you can, especially if you're a visual learner. I try to print a picture on the front and the word on the back, especially when I'm learning common nouns.
That's a good idea. You could also use apps to make flashcards. Okay, so the next method is how you can memorize your flashcards effectively. There's a concept called spaced repetition.
You briefly mentioned it in the first episode.
Yeah, I did. You have a good memory.
It's stored in my long-term memory.
There you go. So, with spaced repetition, you go over a set of words with increasing intervals. You may learn 20 new words one day. You go over them again 2 days later. Then, you review them 4 days later, and again 8 days later. You increase the intervals gradually. Basically, you study new and difficult words more often, and review the easy ones less often.
Gotcha. So, if you didn't remember 5 of the 20 new words one day, you study them 2 days later again, but you go through the rest 4 days later. Eventually, you won't have to go through them at all once you have memorized them.
And the reason this works is something called the psychological spacing effect. Instead of memorizing something over and over right away, as the intervals between memorization get longer and longer, the effort of remembering when it's just about to slip away makes the memory stronger.
So instead of going over the same words every day, you just have to review them when you are about to forget them. And that's what makes you remember them in a much longer term.
Okay, next up, contextual variability.
Wow, that one sounds fancy and a bit complicated.
I know, but it's not. Contextual variability is when you learn a new word by using it in different situations. The idea behind it is that seeing a word in a variety of settings with a new set of different words is more effective in memorizing it than seeing it in the same setting repeatedly.
Okay, so let me know if I understood you. In contextual variability, you try to use vocabulary in different contexts.
Exactly. You immerse yourself in different situations, so you may encounter the words in various contexts. You can also create sentences with a word in different contexts. Like if you're learning the word bright, you can say the sun is bright, she is a bright student, and the room is bright.
That's a good way to learn vocabulary. It's important to know how the same words can be used in different contexts.
Right, but it's also worth knowing that seeing words in more similar situations might actually help you build a really solid understanding of what they mean, almost like getting to know them really well in one specific area. So, I'd recommend a combined way of learning new words both in similar situations and different contexts. All right, moving on. The next method is teaching someone else.
Yeah, I hear that teaching is one of the best ways of learning.
Teaching is effective because it makes you retrieve what you've studied. This goes back to how our memory works. The information gets stored in your long-term memory when you use your working memory to work with the information, which leads to deeper and longer-lasting knowledge retention.
Yeah, that makes total sense. We have to apply knowledge to make it stick in our brains.
Exactly. Okay, so the next one is something that I've never tried myself. Mnemonic devices. Mnemonic devices are basically techniques using mental associations to help your brain remember things. If you've ever used a rhyme or a little song to remember something, you've used this technique.
It's like linking new information to something you already know to make it easier to remember.
Yup, and the stranger and sillier the association is, the more likely you'll remember it. Let's apply this to learning English vocabulary. Let's say you're trying to memorize the word garrulous, which means excessively talkative. Find a part of the word that sounds familiar to something you already know. So, in garrulous, you might notice the sound gar, which could remind you of a car. Now create a vivid and even silly mental image that connects this part to the meaning of the word. So, imagine a car that is excessively talkative.
I'm picturing a car with a mouth, telling stories loudly to everyone.
When you encounter the word again, the gar part will make you think of the talkative car, which will help you remember that the word means excessively talkative.
I don't think I'll ever forget what the word means after this.
Okay, so the last one is a type of mnemonic device, and it's called the memory palace. And this is the one I'm especially interested in trying out myself.
I like the name Memory Palace.
It's an interesting concept. Basically, you create an imaginary or familiar building in your mind, and then mentally place the information you want to remember in specific spots. And when you want to remember it later, you will walk through the building.
Does it have to be imaginary?
It can be imaginary or your actual house. Let's say you're trying to memorize the word ubiquitous, which means present, appearing, or found everywhere. You then choose a place in your memory palace. Let's say the living room couch. Now you imagine a cube, because it sounds a bit like the first syllable of ubiquitous. And the cube is disappearing and then suddenly appearing all around the room, on the walls, the ceiling. Suddenly they're everywhere. And like I said, the sillier the image is, the more easily you will remember it. So let's make the cubes sing and wear tiny hats. Now, whenever you want to remember the meaning of ubiquitous, you will visit your living room couch in your memory palace and encounter the cubes appearing everywhere and singing with tiny hats on them, which will help you recall the meaning of the word present, appearing, or found everywhere.
I have to remember to make it as silly as possible.
Yeah, I think doing these activities will make your study sessions so much more fun.
Oh, definitely. And I think that's important. Like you said, you tend to remember things better when you associate them with emotions. So we got to make it fun and interesting.
Good point. And when it comes to studying, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. What works best is different for each person, so try out different methods and see what fits you. And this brings us to the end of this episode. If you find this video useful, please hit the like button. It will really help us. And if you haven't, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.